Mark will be seeking really to provide you with a new perspective on what it takes to win attention online. Following the theory, we're then going to have a panel session to really focus on some practical examples and have an open discussion. We'll be opening questions out to the floor at that point. Joining Mark, we've got Matt Bush from Google, with really his take on how search and social are increasingly becoming signifiers of relevance online. And we have Jeremy Head, who is a travel editor at iCrossing, and really he's coming at this from the point of view of a content creator, negotiating the online space. After the panel session ends, I hope you'll join us for a drink next door and then likely onto the pub up the road to continue the conversation. So you know, don't rush off at the end. It'll be great to complete the conversation with Mark, with the panel, with myself, with the other members of the social media team. So without further ado, I wonder if you'll join me in welcoming Mark Higginson.
Thank you. Great. Thanks very much, everyone. Just one moment while I get this set up. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for coming along today. You know, it's a fantastic venue that we have here, and in these days of SlideShare and live streaming, it's really nice, I think, to be all together in physical proximity, actually able to see each other face to face. Now, I have a short presentation for you today because what I really want to get to is the panel discussion and the opportunity for us to actually meet each other. But before I get started, what I would like to do is to introduce the team that I work with at iCrossing, because they're here today to address any specific needs that you have after we conclude the first part of the session. So if I could just ask Matthew Neal to stand up for just 1 second. Will you stand up, Matthew? Okay, Matthew is a digital strategist at iCrossing and is a long-time collaborator of mine. We've worked together for 5 years. Thanks, Matthew. And Ross Clark, if you can make yourself known. Ross Clark is working in planning and crisis comms at the moment within the team. Thanks, Ross. And if Kim Slade, Natasha Copeland and Jelly could just stand up, please. Great, thanks, guys. They specialise in community management and brand monitoring. So they're going to be around afterwards. As they've made themselves known, please do approach them with any questions that you might have, as they're really looking forward to meeting you. Okay, so your digital strategy must incorporate use of social media. Understanding how attention works on the web is essential in planning the tactics that you will use. Now, marketing fulfills 3 interrelated goals. Each of those is fundamentally about winning attention. Awareness is about creating a need. Sales about fulfilling demand. And advocacy is about the customer displaying their superior ability to choose to their peers. So everything that we follow, we +1 or we share, is in some ways a reflection of something that we want to demonstrate about ourselves to the external world. So it follows that awareness of you is going to be proportionally higher than sales. Sales are very likely proportionally higher than active advocacy of you, your product or service. You know, this is all very straightforward. Obviously, more people are going to be aware of you than are necessarily going to buy your service or product. Of those, the people who are very satisfied enough to go online to want to be your active advocates, are going to be fewer still. Now, our job as your digital marketing agency is to connect each of those goals and to amplify awareness and advocacy. And most businesses who are using or are considering using social media to raise awareness aren't at that final and late stage where they can rely entirely on voluntary advocacy by their fans. Now, of course, one very well-known example of that is Apple, who don't participate in social in the way that other tech companies do. Obviously, that might be changing because I'm aware that Phil Schiller is now starting to have one-on-one sessions with key advocates to get their message out there. But despite that, Apple is a very, very powerful social signifier. You can imagine someone saying, I'm more a Mac than a PC, as a way of expressing a preference that has a host of associations with it. And ultimately, it is these semantic links that we're really interested in as marketing professionals, that we want to work toward, establishing those values that are associated with your brand. Now, in order to do this, we want to raise awareness by creating something, by taking an action. And as I'm fond of saying, it isn't the media that's social. People are social, and you want to be the idea or the object that they share. Now, these things that you create, they exist in a highly competitive environment. So if we ignore all of the offline media at the moment, and we just think of the web alone, the number of viewable pages has increased at an exponential rate. YouTube alone is adding content at a ratio of 1 hour every second, which equates to about a decade's worth a day, which is quite mind-boggling. Now, a lot of this content might not actually be any good, but what it does do is it adds noise into a system from which it is increasingly hard to tune into a signal. Because even after 5 years, around 3/4 of links are still functional. Each new page is therefore a semi-permanent addition to a shifting landscape of content. Now, this chart from Pew Research highlights people's response to the question, do you ever go online just to pass the time? And people are doing this more and more often. As we can see, that the positive response to that question shows that that use has doubled in the past decade. And although people are doing this more often, the actual overall amount of time they have to look at and then do something with this content is limited. More time spent on the web means less time for other activities. The rise of, say, the second screen, for example, while people are engaged in other activity, they also happen to be online. Now, people are always on the lookout for new things. It doesn't necessarily mean brand new content created that day, but rather things that are new to them and their interests at that particular moment. And I believe that they engage in modes of behavior when browsing. So shopping online, for example, is one self-directed mode and is a small proportion of overall web use. And we can cover that directly through natural search, through paid search and display advertising. But I also believe that it takes a significant input to cause people to switch modes, say to, if I'm keeping up with activities my friends have been getting up to on Facebook, it takes a lot for me to then say switch into that buying mode, for example. Yet when we talk about user journeys, for instance, I think that we almost imagine that people readily slip between these very different behaviors, which isn't actually necessarily the case. And what I'm really interested in is this mode of passing the time, where people go and what they do. And further to that, as part of this study, I actually referenced this in the notes so you can see the original chart on which it is based. 1 in 3 people say they go online every day to pass the time. So that is an awful lot of attention. So the challenge for the individual looking to be distracted in that way is determining how to spend that attention. And for the marketer, it's in how to attract it. So an index used for search results would use page authority as a factor, where authority is determined by links. And for any of us here who have SEO experience, obviously we understand the significance of attracting links in order to establish relevance and popularity. Now, if we were to build an index that took into account social factors to power a recommendation engine, we would want to use popularity as the key measure, and we would need some way of understanding what people were sharing. And up until recently, we didn't really have the ability to take these social signals into account. So prior to the features that we've called Web 2.0, it was broadly the website owners who had the power to create links and thus say what was important. Web 2.0 has democratized this. It passes this ability on to the user, so the inclusion of the like buttons, the follow button, the +1 button, etc., etc. It contributes measures of popularity to the networks to which those buttons, those links, are attached. And as an aside, it's actually worth noting that copy and paste is still the major way in which sharing occurs. So sharing to social platforms is still not yet a fully embedded behavior, just as email is, in my opinion, still the biggest social network, but we don't actually often think of it necessarily in that particular way. So the other factor we would include to determine relevance would be time. Generally, content that has just been created or has just been updated is more relevant. And Google uses its index to check for updates to a page and to alter the universal search results accordingly. Because, of course, Google is interested both in what is most relevant and what is current. Facebook and Twitter are slightly different, however. They rely far more on a stream of content, newer posts appearing on top, and so are not necessarily in the same league, in my opinion, and probably never will be, in terms of finding the more mundane things that we're interested in, that also happen to be quite profitable things as well, such as insurance, financial services products, and so on and so on. What this does is it highlights, I think, the difference between the semi-permanent links that if you maintain a high page authority, you can guarantee on coming up fairly high in Google search results, compared to the ephemeral links that we see on social platforms. So, for example, once a piece of content that I've posted to a Facebook newsfeed or a Twitter stream or whatever drops off the bottom, it's kind of lost. No one is necessarily going to go and dig that particular tweet or that particular post out again. Now, we can represent this more easily as a matrix, and we want the things that we create as brands to become popular and to be seen as highly relevant. We want them to appear in that top right quadrant. And as that relevant content ages, what can happen is it can become a reference point for fresher content on the same subject. What we absolutely don't want is to generate content of low relevance that will almost always slide into irrelevancy. That is a waste of resources, and it is a waste of our time, and a waste of our audience's time as well. Now, a good example of a piece of content that was popular at one time becoming contextually relevant because of unpredictable events is expressed here. This chap, Dave Gilson, is an editor at Mother Jones, a US magazine. And while I was preparing this presentation, I noticed this particular tweet, and he's using the long reads hashtag to highlight something that he thinks is contextually relevant to his followers. And that particular tweet was to do with the Concordia cruise ship running aground. And what he points to is an original piece that appeared in 2008 on Wired magazine, happens to be the 5th result for ship salvage in Google. And this shows how a popular piece of content at the time, all those years ago, is given contextual relevancy due to an event that occurs much more recently and is subsequently linked to and shared with someone's wider network. So, what I'm saying is that a piece of content that doesn't generate these strong signals of popularity within hours of its creation is unlikely to receive very much, if any, attention in its lifetime. So what iCrossing has found is that the time-stamped content that we create, and by time-stamped I mean, say, a blog post where we have a time and a date on it, it's effectively a sell-by date. This content receives around half of the total visits that it will ever receive in its lifetime within around about 7 days of being published. The chart that's sketched out here, again, this is linked to in the notes so that you can see it in a bit more detail, but the chart represents links shared via social platforms, and it was based on a study done by Bitly on their shortened URLs and on URLs posted to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And they actually found that the decay rate, i.e. the time it will take for that link to get half of all the clicks it will ever receive, is about 3 hours, which highlights the importance of posting content at the correct time of day to correctly meet your audience. Now, these links or signals are very, very important because, as I've explained, they fix a page in the topology of the web. Now, pages that are published to big content hubs usually automatically get this fix because those sites' home pages are enormously powerful aggregators of attention and the social signals that generate popularity. Now, there have been studies of this effect. So there's a great book called Linked by Alberto Barabasi that looks at the complex network that is the web. And you know, like every good research team, they started with a hypothesis when they started to do a crawl of the web in order to obtain a suitable data set to study. And what they expected to find was they expected to find that there would be a few important pages with very many links, that most pages would have a roughly equal number but smaller volume of links, and that the remainder of pages, i.e. those that have been freshly created, would have very few links. And this is actually the model that most digital agencies actually unconsciously follow, that over time, attention will become evenly distributed. And that's why we see microsites created on a campaign basis, on brand new domains with no link equity. This kind of philosophy that if you build it, they will come. However, what Barabasi and his team actually found was that this is far from the case. You don't see that kind of normal distribution. What the study revealed was that actually a few pages on a few sites get the majority of all of the available links. And then through the rule of preferential attachment, these sites continually reinforce this position. So this rule means that the sites that are already prominent naturally attract more of the available attention that people have to give. Put very simply, we're naturally drawn to something that other people have already said is good. Now, you'll undoubtedly be familiar with this as the long tail, the notion that a larger share of the sample exists in the tail of the distribution. But as Seth Godin points out in an article, the long tail is for organizations that own warehouses. And what he means by that is it's really good if you own all of the inventory. So, for example, Amazon can realize value from a small number of popular items in the head, but also realize a lot of value from a few sales from the much larger volume of items that exist in the tail. If we translate this to a website, this works great if you're The Guardian and you don't link out very much, and you provide a lot of internal links on your site, and you have an incredibly powerful page that's already present in the head. Most sites, and most corporate sites, sit firmly within the tail, and getting mentions from a large number of other sites in a similar position is an incredibly resource-intensive way of trying to win attention. You'll actually spend much more energy than will possibly be returned to you. Now, just quickly, what I mean by a hub page, okay? So this is the homepage of The Verge, a recently launched gadget blog done in a very, very nice kind of magazine format. And by a hub page, I mean it pulls all of their great content together into one place. It's the page that people are going to bookmark. It's the page that people are going to go directly to when they browse to this site. These pages are highly dynamic. So, for instance, if we look at the Guardian homepage, a hub page, indicated in pink is all of the contents that has changed within 18 hours. So the content on these pages is changing very, very rapidly. Now, we can confirm this pattern, this power law distribution, by looking at the attention received by a huge sample of top UK websites, publicly shared by Quantcast, and based on sites that have implemented their tag. Even in a complete list, almost no corporate sites would feature. The pattern suggests two things. Firstly, content will receive dramatically less attention if it isn't linked to from a hub page and sits within a hub site. Secondly, even if a successful placement is achieved, only a tiny proportion of the overall attention received will be driven to an originating page sitting outside the hub site. So that means if you create a page on your own site and it gets a mention on a highly popular site, say like a gadget blog or something like that, expecting that that is going to drive a huge amount of traffic back to your site is actually a mistake. So taken together, it's actually highly unlikely that you're going to be able to create as large an audience for your content as the most successful sites possess for theirs. Encouraging people to bookmark your site and return regularly will also be similarly difficult to achieve in comparison. It comes down to quality, quantity, and freshness, which obviously the key hub sites have in abundance. And I generally see a super low return visit percentage to corporate sites. Now, as I said, this is a general rule, and you can actually find the same pattern on a single site. So what's represented here by the green line is the distribution of page views, which would be running up on the x-axis, on the y-axis, for 300 posts taken over the course of a year. And you can see that basically what this indicates is that there are one or two very, very successful posts, and then there is a long tail of content dropping off. And this was for a media blog that we happen to have access to the data for. This second one, the orange line, is for an automotive blog, and you can see that exactly the same pattern exists, even though it is a completely different type of content. The third one is for a blog dealing with environmental issues, the red line. You can see again, although the most popular content was probably about 3 times as popular as the content that we saw the most popular content on the first blog, we still have this long tail effect. Now, bear in mind that this pattern, this exists over a year's worth of data. What I also did was took the number of views received by content to one of the top gadget blogs over a day, and you get this effect. And you can see that the original data that I charted is still there, but it's right at the very bottom. The actual amount of attention received by that gadget blog in a day dwarfs the amount of attention received by those other sites quite considerably. Now, this indicates that this prevalent model of working to drive traffic from one place to another is therefore actually problematic and potentially a waste of resources. And it's still something that I hear people saying, especially now this is partly acknowledged by the shift to things such as attribution analysis and engagement metrics in an attempt to find a more effective measurement model. And it touches very much on the ROI of social, and I think bringing an attribution to try and show value, I don't think it really exists in that way. And I think that kind of form of measurement is very applicable to paid and display, where a marketplace exists and competition is based on a structured set of rules and a readily attainable set of data. And I think that we have this idea because we are trapped in some ways in very much a search-led view. And of course, search is about fulfilling a directly expressed need. So of course, if someone is looking for something specific, then they will be driven through to your site. But social media is not ROI-able in anything but the most simplistic sense, because used correctly, what it's actually about is a long-term contribution to the semantic associations that people are actually making in their heads about your brand and associated values. So actually, to go beyond the idea of driving traffic, we need to stop erroneously placing the brand website at our heart of the view of the web. And in fact, what we need to move towards is this usage-centered model that actually acknowledges that people stay in situ when engaged in an activity, and that it takes considerable input to switch modes. Data from Web Trends indicated that unique visits to the websites of the Fortune 500 decreased on average by 23% last year. Yet a social platform like Tumblr goes from a billion to 10 billion posts in roughly the same period. So it isn't like there's a lack of people online doing things. There is an attention deficit to corporate sites because they are destinations where demands are fulfilled rather than places where people actually go to pass the time. And I know the sites that we monitor, 70% saw visits decrease or stay the same over the past 3 years. And you should check your own analytics and have a look at that. You know, if you're a transactional site, you should probably exclude those pages that are part of your product catalog, because obviously they're not the pages that are necessarily about the kind of awareness-generating content that I'm talking about today in this presentation. Coca-Cola said it very well back in 2010. They said, "We would like to place our activities and brands where people are, rather than dragging them to our platform." And we at iCrossing would very, very much like to help businesses deliver on this promise. So here is an example that confirms this. Gregory Lyons in our Research and Insight department wrote a great post recently predicting when Facebook would hit 1 billion fans. Some of the sites there are absolutely fantastic that appear for a search for that particular expression. Here are some of the sites that we were featured on. Absolutely great. That translated into mentions on 300 plus websites. On Mashable alone, 10,200 tweets, 2,300 likes. What did it mean for our site, however, our blog, Connect? Well, that actually only translated into 3,800 unique page views and 6 comments. So you get to see the disproportionate amount of attention received by those key sites compared to our blog. And I think what we're seeing is fascinating, and it actually proves what I've outlined in this presentation. It was a great post for Mashable, great for generating awareness for us, but ultimately we're having to take measurements by proxy in order to see what's really being achieved. I'd actually recommend that you don't use your main website to try and compete with these hubs by becoming a place where people pass their time. For example, if you run a transactional travel website, a travel blog is probably only going to deliver an incremental benefit at best, if at all. If you create microsites to support individual campaigns, I'd abandon these too. Both are very, very inefficient. Our Blog Connect is useful to us in training people to write, and if that's your objective, then that's great. But it's arguable that the success of a post like that actually has more to do with the idea itself than the appearance on the blog. So what we need to do is to work together on coming up with the things that people are going to want to talk about in the places where they are doing the talking. And we need a clear and creative proposition that is flexible enough to work wherever we need to place it. Through study of your audience and demonstrating that you understand what's important to them, you'll establish credibility. And you can use this to support the events in your marketing and PR calendars with more resource-intensive content, such as motion graphics and video, and outreach to the major hubs. Constant repetition will build authority and your influence as a reputable source of opinion. And finally, it's the mediation of your relationships with external sites that is critical to success. So, I kind of think of social platforms as lily pads in a way. You only get the full benefit of the multiplying effect of these platforms' networks if you're present on them. For instance, Facebook's newsfeed, Twitter and Tumblr's stream, and in the case of Google+, the main search results. The great thing is that the same ideas can run in different forms across each of these platforms. So to recap, we're here to win attention, distractions are ever growing, time is ultimately finite, popularity determines relevance, and attention is concentrated in popular places. So what you're going to do is you're going to create assets in volume for social platforms to build credibility and demonstrate consistency. You're going to work on relationships with hub websites and promote what proves popular to these hubs by showing that you understand their audience. Because let's remember, these popular sites, although they look very powerful, they're actually in a really, really precarious position. Because if I go to one of those sites and the content isn't fresh and it hasn't been updated and there hasn't been a large number of posts within the past 24 hours, there is a very, very low cost of switching. I can go to a competitor very, very easily. And given the very, very tight margins that these sites run on, it is possible for you to produce content of high quality that you can bundle up, and by showing that you understand their audience, give to them, and they're very, very likely to run with that. And you're likely to receive a lot of awareness in situ as a result. And finally, this will give you the all-important social proof, and that is people able to see other people recommending you and the things that you talk about. I think that right now we're in a kind of no man's land between the corporate site and whatever comes next. And this battle for attention has actually been going on for a few years and is largely ignored. And I believe that the next is working to interest people across multiple social platforms by laying down social signifiers in these places through considered asset creation. And I've heard the phrase brands as publishers being used a lot. And this doesn't mean setting up a whole new department within your own business to compete with those whose sole reason for being in business is to make money from content. What it means is developing a strategy with us and using our skills to complement your own so that you can behave tactically and with great efficiency. Now what I've done is I've pulled together all of the sources that I used in preparing this particular viewpoint. So I think there's a link on the posters that we've provided so that you can go online and download this and read up on these yourselves. If you're short of time, I would recommend the posts Engagement, Fashionable Yet Bankrupt, and Debunking the Unique Visitor, Finding Your Real Visitors, as two really, really core posts that are worth reading. I've also included on the bottom there another 5 links, which are kind of more to do with content and the way things are going there. I think the Instagram one is very interesting because it talks about the importance of constraints on a platform. You know, if you think about all of the things that Facebook is trying to do, you know, why would something like Instagram be popular, which is basically about taking and sharing photos? And I think it's actually the constraints around the platform that people understand the one thing that it does well that is very, very important. The post about Gorka, about their redesign. Gorka, they obviously, probably well known to you, they operate Jalopnik, Kotaku, Gorka, Jezebel, etc. They've gone from 13.3 million visits in January 2010 to 30 million in January 2011. So reading their view on how you go about winning attention, I think, is really, really interesting. Their position is you make every page a front page because it acknowledges that most people actually only look at a single page when they visit your site. All this is borne out by the analytics data. There's another good post there, another good article about the Boston Globe and about how they are formatting their content responsively for different screen sizes. This acknowledgement that people are consuming, are viewing content on several different platforms, possibly several different platforms throughout the day as well. The article on The Verge is also good about a new gadget site entering a space that's already occupied by two very, very powerful gadget blogs. And then finally, nowness. I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with nowness, but I had to include this because it's the exception that proves the rule. So LVMH, the luxury brand, actually closed their e-commerce site, eLuxury, and relaunched it as a pure content site covering fashion, art, culture, music, design, travel, and luxury. And that goes back to the point that I made at the beginning about the importance of owning associations in people's minds. And you might be thinking, well, are you saying that it is possible to become a content destination? And yes, it is. But LVMH are a multi-billion-dollar business. And for them, spending a few $1 million on producing original content to actually own what people's perception of them is probably a pretty good deal. But we don't all have those kind of resources to spend. So we have to be very, very clever about the things that we choose to do and where we choose to spend those resources. So the features that these sites are bringing to bear are really worth reflecting on if you're thinking about competing for attention rather than collaborating with these sites, which I think is my key message. So what I'd like to say is the team and I do Google Hangouts on a Friday afternoon. You can email me or Georgie for a place. Matt is a little bit shy, but the rest of us would like to talk more about what's going on. So, you know, in the case of Google launching Search Plus Your World, you could jump on a Hangout with us and actually have a chat with the team. So, as I said, we're doing this regularly, so just drop Georgie or myself an email, and we can either do a more public session, or if you prefer a private session with the team, because I think it's really, really important that we start to have these kind of conversations more and more often, and not just when we're working on projects together. That is the theory and a general sense of what I think you should be doing with your existing resources. So I hope that we're now going to draw out the putting into practice in the panel discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. If I can ask Matt and Jeremy to join us down the front for the panel session. Marvellous. Cool. We'll open this out to the floor, so as you have questions, please raise a hand, catch my eye, and we'll come to you. We've gathered a few questions which I'll sort of field in as needed to combat any tumbleweed moments, but I'm confident we won't get those. I think probably to kick us off, it'd be great to have introductions from Matt and from Jeremy, and to give us really your take on what we've heard today.
Shall I go first?
Go for it, sir.
Hello, my name's Jeremy Head. I'm travel editor at iCrossing. I've been with the company for 3.5 years now. Before I joined iCrossing, I was a freelance travel journalist for about a decade, and I still write guidebooks and do quite a few other bits and pieces of proper travel writing alongside my job at iCrossing. The reason I joined iCrossing was because they said they were looking for journalists, and I think that's something that continues to inspire and interest me today about working for iCrossing. You might have expected them to be looking for copywriters in an agency role, but no, they were looking for journalists, and that said something to me. It said they get content and they treat content seriously, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to talk a bit more about that later.
Hi, I'm Matt Bush. I head up the agency team at Google. I mean, I found that presentation absolutely fascinating. I think, you know, some data points that we probably haven't explored before. Just very, very quickly, actually, I mean, I was quite interested to hear about Gawker because, as a couple of people in the audience know, actually, I used to run kind of the UK licence for Gawker, and we couldn't actually ever make it work on a commercial level in the UK. And we probably perhaps should have tried a bit harder, because maybe if we did, then we would have seen the massive growth in traffic that clearly the US site has seen over the last couple of years. So I think, you know, one of there were so many key takeouts for me, and I've written them all down, and hopefully they'll come out during the debate. But one of the key ones which Mark actually started with was this idea that media isn't social, but we are social. And I think, you know, this has been at the kind of the heart of a lot of the thinking that we've been putting in place recently. This kind of notion that social isn't, you don't go somewhere to be social. It's not a destination as such. It's just a core human behaviour. So, you know, we're here today, we're actually here for a work event, but, you know, we're being social. We've spoken to people that we perhaps haven't met before, and we'll probably do so again once we've finished in this session. So, you know, social is a core human behaviour, and I think, you know, to get sort of the initial line about Google Plus out from the start, and hopefully it will come up in more conversation later. The point of Google Plus is not to be another destination. The point of Google Plus is to add a social layer to other Google products that are there already. So, you know, if you use search, if you use YouTube, if you use Gmail, if you use Docs, if you use your mobile, if you use display ads, any of those products is to add a social layer to all of those to actually make them more relevant to the audience. So, you know, going back right from the start for the original idea of Google, is about having relevancy. So, you know, what are you looking for? Can we put something in front of you which is most relevant at that particular time? And so, you know, that's the kind of continuing theme for us, and you know, hopefully there'll be more conversations about that as we go. Real-time feedback, just very quickly, if you want to give me real-time feedback, you don't have to do it on Google+, you can do it on Twitter, at Matt J. Bush. Always good to hear what everyone thinks, so please throw that in as well. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think I'll fire in one initial question, which is what makes great content? What content should we be producing? Where should we be putting it?
And I knew this question was coming, but it's still not that easy a question to answer, actually, because I don't think there is an element of serendipity to what really goes places online, and I don't think yet, anyway, we've reached a stage where we can say we just know what research to do, what to write, and where to put it, and it'll take off and go viral. I'm sick to death of people telling me they're shooting viral videos. There is no such thing unless it's a video about viruses. So I would say great content is about, in my opinion, as a journalist working a lot for a marketing agency, it's about attention between instinct and research. So as a journalist, I've honed my knowledge and experience of a particular sector, the travel sector, and of the sort of people that read about travel and of the sort of destinations that get written about in travel over many, many years. So I've got a pretty good idea about the sort of stuff that is likely to be published over the next few weeks in the travel supplements at weekends. What you can add to that in a marketing context is a better knowledge and understanding of your audience and your customers, and that's about research. Put those two together and you're beginning to get somewhere closer to great content. You're beginning to get close to content which is relevant. We've used the word relevancy a lot already this afternoon, and so yeah, it's another one I'd use again right now. Great content is relevant content.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, in that great content is whatever a consumer deems to be great content. It's very difficult to kind of, you know, say, right, this is going to be great content. There's Mark made the point that not all of the content on YouTube is good content. Who says? You know, that it could be the worst video in the world, but if lots of people quite like that video and it gets a lot of views, then actually that's good content. And I think, you know, this kind of it's becoming even more difficult to decipher or define exactly what great content is and what's going to fly. I mean, you know, before Christmas, I'm sure everyone watched the Fenton video on YouTube. It might have been after Christmas. It's been a long start to the year. And I think, you know, who would have thought, for example, that a dog chasing some deer in Richmond Park would have been the video that actually went around the world? If a bunch of creators were sat in a room for weeks, they probably would never have come up with that in a million years. And so I think, you know, it's becoming increasingly difficult, which is where this kind of test and learn and iterate idea comes through, which is baked within most of the big successful tech organisations. This kind of notion that, you know, never fail to fail fast, learn, move on. And I think, you know, you have to start taking risks with content to find what is great content for your brand. And bear in mind, of course, that, you know, we have actually got this 7 billion people potentially. I mean, there's only a couple of billion on the web at the moment, but I'm sure that will change once mobile phones get in everyone's hands. We've got these people who are actually generating content for our brands anyway. So 77% of content online is actually generated by users. So they're out there talking about the brands that they love, sometimes in some instances they hate. So what social allows us to do is to tap into that and really start to drag out who the key influencers are for our brands. One other thing actually on the, do you want to mention the prize, Richard, so we can get some questions out?
It's a great idea, yes, that is a great idea. So Matt is kind enough to donate a small prize for us with a bag of goodies, YouTube-themed goodies. I won't reveal what's in there, I'm sure it'll be, you can imagine the exciting presents you can take home to the kids over the weekend. So that will go to the best question. And so far it's me, I suppose. So on that note, I'll hand over to the floor. Any questions, comments? Yes, please.
Actually, Jeremy, you could probably speak to this because of your experience.
Oh, sorry, we've got a mic coming your way.
Jeremy, you can probably speak to this because of your experience as a journalist. Content's expensive to produce. So how do you convince stakeholders with the pockets and the checkbook to fail often and fast and look at numbers and data and generate net new content that's going to cost them more money and continue to do it and do it and do it and do it until you get it right?
That's a great question, and I honestly wish I could give you a completely cast iron answer, because it's really, really hard. And I think the change to the Google algorithm middle of last year, called Panda, to those of you who aren't familiar with it, really focused people's attention on the quality of content, I think, in a way that perhaps hadn't been the case previously. So as a content creator and someone involved in commissioning people to create great content, I'm feeling a lot more positive now than I was at the beginning of the year last year. But in terms of how to actually get someone to put the money where their mouth is and spend it on quality writers, I think it's a case of building a case for it. So it's a little bit about what Matt was saying about testing, proving, and moving on. And I would say you want to build what you test on some decent research as well. I think it's difficult to do, though, and I think there is a degree to which I think there's an opportunity there potentially for the business that does the right research, gets the right writers, and starts to create the really great content.
I think this idea of content creation is actually something that I'm kind of speaking against in my presentation, because I'm actually saying you don't have to have those deep pockets to do it. You don't have to go through this process. There's certainly a need for that research. There's certainly a need for that idea. But you know, we have a client who's going to the Geneva Motor Show very soon. And actually, if you have that presence, as I said, on what I call the lily pads, you know, like Tumblr, Google+, Facebook, Twitter, you know, most of the people who are going on behalf of that automotive manufacturer to that motor show will have an iPhone 4S or something, you know. They can produce the kind of little bits of content that aren't going to win huge amounts of attention, but are going to get the message out there associated with the values and personality of that brand of, we're going to the motor show, we're very excited about going, here's some of the things we're packing up, here's us leaving, here's us arriving, here's the setting up, here's us, you know, with the exclusives that we can expect, this is our experience of the event. And that kind of stuff doesn't take deep pockets to produce. In actual fact, there are probably those of you here now who are tweeting about this event or could produce bits of content about Social Media Week, for example, at little to no cost. What's important is that we have the mechanism in place to then understand which pieces of those which of those smaller pieces of content prove interesting and popular, that we can develop something out of for those longer form pieces that we're then going to package up and take to those key hub sites in order to get them interested and to get it in front of those larger audiences that we find there. I think we almost see our social as a bit of a test bed, in a way, to find those things that are going to win the largest amounts of attention for us.
So your point's taken in terms of doing it often in smaller quantity, but even that costs money. somebody's got to go to Geneva to cover the convention. Somebody's got to be here to cover it. So
but these
there's
people
still
are going
money
to,
there being
sure,
spent.
but these people are going to Geneva anyway as part of that particular event, and it's about having I think all of the staff with the awareness and ability, and you're starting to see those skills. People have those skills anyway because they are using these tools. It's about getting them just to do that and having the confidence in them to do that with the right training if necessary, but really just getting that message out there into the business that it's no longer just the purview of the marketing and PR departments.
I think the other side of it is so kind of the way that social media has originally kind of come about is by following individuals and connecting with individuals, but increasingly we're seeing the kind of the next phase, which is moving from the social graph to the interest graph. And with various tools, search being a fairly obvious one, we can get a really good idea of who's interested in what, and going back to what I was saying earlier about who's most influential there. And so if you're trying to make a case within a business and you're in a particular category or sector, it's not that difficult to try and understand what's being spoken about in that industry or sector, and therefore use that as a way of actually trying to build a case. So, for example, we can see that competitor X is actually building this content already. This is the kind of added value that we can see them getting because of the comments or the shares or the ripples that they're producing through that content or the plus ones. So it's almost like kind of doing it in reverse, which is to say if we don't do it, we're going to get further and further behind. And I think I'd be very surprised if there wasn't a single interest category where you couldn't actually demonstrate that.
Many of the questions we gathered very much linked to that question, but probably put it into reverse. How do we measure what we do? What's the ROI question? So it's one thing getting the investment or getting the initiative. How do we measure what we do?
I think I touched on that in the talk by saying that actually social media is really easy to measure. You break it out exactly like you do any of your other channels, from display, paid, natural, whatever else. I think the point is that what you will see is a small number of direct sales, a small direct benefit from social, and that's entirely, and that's entirely all right. Simply because the bigger picture is that social is a long-term investment in the associations that you want people to have with your brand and your business, and it's about taking a position with certain values, with opinions on certain topics that you're doing for the long term. And so each campaign you run is about establishing social proof, about building reputation capital, the trust that you have with a growing audience that actually over a much longer time frame pays dividends that aren't necessarily immediately translatable into a clear path from an appearance on this website to a conversion on your own site.
Yeah, I think we've got enormously savvy and sophisticated consumers now, which means that they expect a lot more from their brands. They expect to be spoken to in a very specific way. They expect to have a similar experience wherever they go. That could be whether you're talking about individual devices, so whether it's smartphone or tablet or desktop. It could be whether it's in store. It could be whether it's on the phone and so on. So that they want to be treated in a certain way. How that kind of all comes back to ROI can only really be proved over a longer period of time. And clearly there's an investment required of some sort. It's either time or it's actually money. But then having said that, and again, just to sort of move on to Google Plus very quickly, there are actually easier ways to measure ROI using Google Plus. So if you start to put content onto Google Plus, you should very quickly start to see how that's having an effect on your other marketing that you may be doing on other Google products. So for the sake of argument, if you're increasing your number of plus ones, then that should improve your click-through rate. If your click-through rate improves, your quality score improves, which means the cost that you're actually paying goes down. And so, there are, without question, ways in which we're starting to be able to measure it on a more ROI base. But, I think, I was having this chat with Richard earlier. There is this kind of danger and this kind of sort of dead end that we force ourselves into digital, which is because you can measure it to the very, very kind of minutiae of the tiny bit of ROI. We do it, and it's expected, which isn't the same across other channels. And so, maybe we need to take a step back and say, well, look, where is consumer interest at the moment? There's a slide I've actually put together this morning, which demonstrates the growth of media consumption, which essentially is, so we're now at, I think it's saying that we're now kind of consuming media 95 hours a week, whereas, 100 years ago it was like an hour a week, for the sake of argument. 100 years ago you were looking at print and maybe some outdoor media. Now you've got a multitude of channels, and so with this kind of increase in media consumption, then you need to make sure that you're kind of measuring where your audience is going, wherever they're going, to make sure you're getting the best or the true picture of the value that you're getting out of them.
Cool. Thank you. Any more questions? Right.
It's highly addictive, and it's one of the fastest growing websites out there at the moment. Can you see Pinterest becoming one of these valuable hubs outside of a corporate website where they can share and create content?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes back to the point I made about the importance of constraints and people understanding and people actually finding it very appealing when a site or an app or a service does something that is very, very clearly defined. And I actually think that as Facebook starts to bolt on more and more features, becomes more and more of the portal, and starts to have interoperability problems, or interoperability issues, I should say, you're not going to see people responding in the same way to the features they add there as they are to new startups coming along that offer one particular service that they do very well. And I think Pinterest is an example of that. And I think that's really, really interesting to watch.
But personally, I'm not sure I get it. Yeah. And I'm the biggest social media tart going. I'm kind of everywhere. I mean, I'm the sort of bloke who stops at a set of traffic lights and can't help but pick up my smartphone and check Twitter. And so, but for some, I can't get Pinterest. But whether that's just my personal opinion or it's irrelevant.
I think 85% of users are female at the moment, aren't they?
Is that right?
I think so. Yeah. Not in the UK.
Which doesn't surprise me. All I get shown is like baking and female clothes, which don't really interest. But anyway, look, that's by the by. I think the point is moving towards a more niche audience and a more kind of personal level of communication. So this kind of mass broadcast, which broadly social media has kind of had up until now, where you're broadcasting everything to everyone all of the time, is starting to kind of migrate into something a bit more personal and a bit more niche. And I think that's why we're seeing things like Pinterest come through, things like Path, which keeps getting more and more funding. Again, I'm using it a lot, but I'm struggling to see where it fits within Twitter and so on. I'm sure there's a role there, but it will take some time to get there. But I think the point is this kind of move into much more niche products and away from people and into interests. So the key thing that Pinterest is doing is this idea of moving from following individuals to following interests. And I think that's going to be a consistent and interesting theme over the next couple of years in social media.
Right, and we had another question back here. Sir.
I've just got a random question. You were saying earlier about taking a risk with social media. If, for example, someone works for a financial institution that very much depends on the security of its customers, keeping all the information locked within the organisation and ensuring that, obviously, the fact that they're FSA regulated and those sort of things, how does a financial institution break into the social media, not including companies like Compare the Market, those sort of, I'm talking banking type of institutions, or in that category. How do they break into social media without the fear of losing customers because their customers are trading large quantities or large sums through their accounts? How is it possible to take that risk? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, and it's a tough one. And don't get me wrong, it's one that other financial institutions have asked me. I mean, there's an insurance company that we're working for at the moment, and they don't really want to do much because they're scared their content is dull and boring, and potentially it is to a certain extent. But I think there are things that you can do in order to segment your audience. So you're talking to the audience depending on either where they sit as a customer or what particular products they're already buying off you. Or where they are in the purchase funnel, and so on. So there are sort of baby steps that you can do to start with. I don't think if you're talking about financial services, which is as you say, a very sensitive area. I wouldn't dive straight in. I'd take baby steps and test small things with kind of the sort of the more secure areas of the business. And then, you know, as I said before, it's only by understanding what kind of content or how those individuals are engaging with whatever content you're putting out there that you can start to form a more full opinion. It's a tough one. I'd love to kind of sit down and talk more about your sort of overall strategy, because I think, you know, there are definitely good examples that we're starting to see of organisations who are using social media and what potentially could be seen as, like, you know, non-social media channels. So, you know, we're starting to see them, but it's early days for financial services.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no suggestion that any of the sensitive data that financial organisations hold, that there would be a risk of it leaking out somehow into, you know, into the world of social. I think the more important point is really the organisation having a good hard look at itself and actually understanding what its values are and what the values of its customers are, and then rather than producing content, say, around its products, actually thinking about, well, what are the things it's facilitating people doing? How is it seen by its customers? And let's think about having a conversation or producing content based on, and I know some of the work that we've done for one of the major banks was on life stages, and it was on the fact that you need financial support at various stages in your life for key events in your life. So let's talk about those rather than the actual products themselves. Obviously, there's a natural link there, but it's just getting to that stage, I think, where those particular kinds of institutions are comfortable enough and in many cases are brave enough to really start to produce that kind of content and start having that kind of conversation with their customers.
I mean, it's always going to be a relatively niche audience, isn't it? I mean, you know, it's unlikely you're going to do a hangout with David Beckham for the sake of argument to try and get, you know, hundreds of thousands of followers, which he did. If you didn't watch it on YouTube, he was actually quite entertaining. But so I think, you know, it's understanding what that niche is, and I think, you know, you could potentially take it outside of the sort of the initial product. So I think, you know, it's if you look at something that the Cadbury's have been doing with us recently, they are an Olympic sponsor. They realised through analysing the data in the search feeds across all of Google Plus that there was a massive number of BMX fans on Google Plus. And so what they actually did was got Sinead Reid, who, for those who don't know, is probably going to win the gold medal in BMX at the Summer Olympics. And they got her to do a hangout. They ran a competition and so on. Not talking about Cadbury's at all. The fact was it was Cadbury's who were hosting it. That's not sensitive. It's just a different way of having a conversation and adding a kind of a layer of value to, and demonstrating that you understand your customer.
Wow. Today I learned that BMX is an Olympic event. I feel extremely old all of a sudden.
I think we could.
I can give you a couple of ideas on that afterwards. I've just come out of a 25-year career in banking to join a media startup. I'd be quite happy to give you a couple of ideas on that.
I think we squeeze in one final question. Lady there.
In your experience, is there a particular day of the week or a particular time where you can generate the most engagement from your content, would you say?
I think as I touched on in the presentation, you know, this notion that as Bitly found, that most links decay that are shared on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook within about 3 hours indicates that, yes, there are optimum times for posting. And I think that what you need to do is a process of trial and error, obviously depending on the location in the world that you're based, and also the types of content as well, and actually come up with a plan for the kind of things that you're going to post based on your audience interests and what you think will interest them, and then actually just look at what does well and change it up during the course of the week, during the course of the month, and over time. And I think this is where the key point about social being an investment for the long term comes in. Over time, you'll start to build up really, really valuable intelligence and data that only you have, that you know about your audience, that will really, really be able to give you insight into when the best times are to approach them and when your audience are going to be most responsive. And
the other way that you can do it is speak to Google. tell us what interests and kind of content you're going to be producing. We can then tell you when kind of the interest for those on Google is most active. We've got incredible data about who's searching for what and when, and on what platform, what device. And then on your Google Plus page, set up Google Analytics, which you can do as well. You can link that to your website. And then very quickly, you can start to see, depending on what content you're posting, when people are interacting with it most. So in the space of a month or so, you could have a pretty good idea of when would be the best time to post to get the maximum engagement. Shameless Google plug.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap it up. A number of hands went up at that last call for questions, so please do save them and approach us in the next room for drinks. Please will join us for drinks, and thank you very much for attending, and please thank the panel.